One of the most frequent questions that I get asked is how do you grow a mobile home park portfolio when you have a full-time job that you can't just leave? More importantly than that, I get asked all the time, what if I go after small mobile home parks? What if I go after mobile home parks that are out of state and a plane right away? Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a longtime friend of mine, Ryan Hill. Ryan Hill has done all of these things. His story is awesome. I actually invited him to speak with me at Seco about his story. So, guys, I'm excited to introduce Ryan. Ryan, tell everybody a little bit about you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Ryan. Yeah, so I am a former, I can say as of 2 weeks ago, former elementary school principal. So I've been in the mobile home park space for about 3.5 years now. I think I reached out to you almost maybe a little over 4 years ago. And you've been an awesome piece of my growth and a great mentor for me. But started with that first little mobile home park, about 15 spaces just south of Kansas City. Um, it, it was on LoopNet, I think, for over 2.5 years. Got owner financing on that one. Prior to that, though, I was a residential real estate agent for 13 years, so I had some background in real estate. And at the time, I was teaching high school science, and then went into administration about 7 years ago, and was able to balance pretty well both aspects of keeping up with full-time job and figuring out how to get into the space first, which is truly the hardest part, is just getting cracking that first egg. And then now we're at 13 communities, over 600 spaces, in just under 3 years. So
What I tell folks when they look at me like I'm crazy that I moved into a mobile home to chase my dreams, what I tell folks is you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't have to be as bold as I was, quitting your job and betting the farm, quite literally, is what I did to chase it. You can stay on your job. It's just going to take longer.
yeah.
So how many full years start to finish? Like day one, when was day one for you for I'm doing this, it's just a matter of time, and boom, I quit. This is all I'm doing now.
Yeah. So I would say early 2018 is when I started educating myself on the mobile home space. And then we had a life event where we moved from Washington State to I'm just outside of Boise, Idaho now. Moved closer to family. I didn't want to rebuild my residential real estate business. And so that's really where I made the decision. So we closed on that first park about 3 months after we made that move. So that's kind of the timeline, and the educational piece was important for me. Listening to a lot of podcasts like yours at the time, like Kevin Bupp and Dave's, or Frank's podcast. So reading articles, just positioning myself so when I saw an opportunity and I was ready for it. And by the way, I didn't have a lot of money to do that. We took a HELOC out for the down payment on that owner finance deal. Massively underestimated the amount of reserves I would need for the park owned homes, that still paying the price on that a little bit. It takes a while, and it takes a lot of capital jumping into some of these deals, but learning it on the way. So essentially about 4 years total, but about a year of education before we pulled the trigger on that first property.
Before we dive into the details, which I really want to do about specifically your first park, because that to me, Ryan, is just an incredibly compelling story about a lot of things, mostly your character and your resolve, and what it's going to take for folks who want to do this full time, but for what X, Y, or Z reason can't leave their job yet. Let's talk a little bit more first about the timeline. So let's just, for ease sake, say it was 4 years from idea to quitting and going full time. The first year of which was mostly education. Talk to me a little bit more in detail about year 2, 3, and then
Mhm.
obviously the last year before you went full time.
Yeah. So first year education, second year, like making connections with brokers who really don't pay much attention to you if you don't have a name in the space or experience. So you just have to reach out to a lot of them and consistently follow up with them. I was combing, the mobile home park store, Crexy, LoopNet, just almost nightly. I was on there looking for new properties that were coming on the market. There weren't a lot close to where I live, so I just expanded it nationally. And the specific one I found, I just used the filter to find the ones, and I don't recommend this, but to find the ones that were on market for the longest time. So first of all, if they're on Crexy or LoopNet, they've already been through dozens of eyes and brokers, preferred buyers list and everything else. So it's kind of, a lot of them are kind of the scraps. So I found like the scraps of the scraps of this community that was on market for like 2.5 years. I flew to St. Louis in February to find. I was looking at a different community just outside of St. Louis. Toured that one. It was a class C minus community. I knew right away way too much work. Toured it with the owner. Walked into one unit. And the resident had literally floor to ceiling a room full of snakes. So he was breeding snakes in his house. There were aggressive breed dogs all over. It was a mess. So I still had like 3 days left in Missouri before I'd fly home, and I was like, I'm not buying this park. So I had made the contact with the broker of the park that I eventually bought. Drove 4 hours to Kansas and met with the park owner, basically a handshake deal with him. He liked me. He had no financials. So we were able to arrange a owner finance deal. Drove back to St. Louis trying to beat a snowstorm. And it was just kind of a crazy adventure. But I only found that I only went out there because I had cultivated that relationship with that broker before, and that's just goes to the consistency of following up with possible properties or that you're interested in, because you never know when the timing is going to be right for that property to open up to you.
And the one that you ended up buying, you mentioned February. Was that at about your 1 year anniversary?
Yeah, from when I started, it was about a year. And then we put that under contract, and we ended up closing that one July 2019, or sorry, yeah. So 2000, so that was 2000. So let me start that part over. So we closed on that first property in July 2019. Looked at it about 10 months before for the first time. And so negotiations back and forth and that type of thing, but finally got it closed. And I had to find somebody to go and do inspection on on the park owned home. Mostly they're park owned homes. So I found a good inspector. Most of them didn't return my calls. So the guy that ended up doing it, he's now one of our regional managers for our entire portfolio, because he went in and took care of the inspection early on. He's also a general contractor, so he was fixing a lot of the issues in the homes after I closed that kind of cropped up and we didn't know what happened. His wife ended up being our property manager for that first park, and now she's our regional director over all of our managers for our Midwest portfolio. So those early connections, they developed into great relationships, and those folks are growing with us as we grow the portfolio.
So it took you, call it about 18 months from idea to close your first one. You were in Washington State, you bought in Kansas, so a flight away. What was the unit count, park owned home count, price, seller carry terms?
Yeah, so it's a 15 space. There are 13 homes on it. At the time, only 2 were tenant owned. So the majority were park owned. About 60% occupied. Um, so bought that park for 269,000. I put 83,500 down on it, and a 3-year balloon. So it was a 25-year amortization, 5.5% interest rate. So those were the terms on the owner financing and kind of the what the park looked like. It's in a tertiary market, but it's in the Kansas City MSA. So sometimes it's a little challenging to find, if you have a vacancy, to find qualified folks. It takes longer in those markets than it does some of our, like Springfield, Missouri, for example. Very easy to fill a unit.
Note that price, that's a good price, but you didn't steal this mobile home park. You didn't. You got a pretty fair price. So 18 months went by, you were looking everywhere, you were checking Crexy, LoopNet religiously, and you actually flew out to look at another mobile home park, which I love to hear. So you were spending money before you ever closed anything. You were spending your time and a lot of that because you had a full-time job. So you're flying out on weekends and possibly paid time off. Talk to me about, you mentioned earlier you didn't keep enough in reserve. Talk to
Mhm.
me about the expected CapEx that you kind of thought going in. Talk to me about what really happened, and more specifically, because I know folks are in the back of their minds going to ask this as a follow-up. What about the cash flow? Did you cash flow it all out of the gate, or how long did it take to get cash flow positive?
Yeah, it cash flowed out of the gate. But within a year, we turned over 90% of the residents. None of the residents had background checks, credit checks. The owner, as long as they paid, he was good with it, and he lived in the park at the time. So the way I underwrote it, and my underwriting was in its very infancy, really thought that I could use the cash flow to slowly fix up these units, but found out that the previous owner fixed it with, like essentially duct tape and bubble gum. Hit a lot of things. So like it was a renovated unit that he'd just done, but it turns out that the subfloors were shot in a lot of areas. Electrical, there were like people that were taking the electric wire out of it before they were finally evicted, wasn't replaced. So some things that I didn't probably know what to look for at that time. Much better educated, and experience has taught me those things. But there have been times where I've had to dip into like my personal savings, because there have been months where it wasn't cash flowing enough to cover the note, because the expenses were so high on fixing up the homes and making them livable for people that were in there. It's looking back, there's no way I would have done that same deal again. But at some point you have, I felt I needed to pull the trigger to get into the game, and have learned a lot of lessons that have been costly, but in the end, they've led to where I am now, and where my partners are now. And so it's been good in the long run. But boy, I really didn't have much in reserves. I had maybe 10-15,000 going into that, and I probably needed 80 to 100,000.
So obvious question is, it may have been a profitable venture in
Mhm.
terms of NOI, but if you needed 80K and you had 13 units and you had 90% turnover,
Mhm.
and you're a time zone or two away, what did that look like for folks who are like me, Ryan? When I started,
Yeah.
I didn't have any money to give.
Yeah, a lot of stressful nights, a few sleepless nights of how am I going to piece this together. Some of it was, timing with some of the COVID, relief money coming in. That helped a little bit towards, the end of the second, third year. But it really was a lot of prayer, and I did have some savings, and then my property managers just looking out for me, doing things essentially for free until they knew I would take care of them later, or that once the park started getting back up to occupancy, that they'd be taken care of. But you have to have those relationships developed in before you could do something like that. So it wasn't for the faint of heart. Like I said, like looking back, I probably wouldn't have done that first deal again, but it's led to some great things now.
Ryan, I just want to thank you for several things, but most specifically sharing this. This is not an easy story to tell. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of moments where you undoubtedly didn't know if it was going to work out,
Mhm.
and you bet your house on it, quite literally, with a HELOC, right? So I want to thank you for putting yourself out there on my podcast to let the world hear this. And for those listeners, I want you to know that a big reason why I think one of many reasons why Ryan is successful is because he's willing to be honest with himself. You don't necessarily need to be as public as he does or I am about your failures, or at least your speed bumps along the way. But because Ryan did that, and I want to point this out for you, if it's not overly obvious, listeners, that Ryan was honest with himself about that. And because he didn't create a delusion about how things were going or things and stuff, Ryan was able to eventually address this. So, Ryan, first and foremost, I want to thank you for, again, coming on here and being honest with this. But also, I want to tell the listeners who are new to this or trying to get into this, they're probably in the back of their mind going, yeah, but I'm not going to make that mistake, right? And the truth is, you will.
Yeah.
You will, because what Ryan's describing here is not that uncommon in this space. There are a lot. You want to buy relatively cheaply from a mom and pop, you're going to get folks who are not screened. You're going to get duct taped things. You, sure, maybe you don't buy a lot of park owned homes and there's a lot of tenant owned homes, but that doesn't mean infrastructure, roads, trees were not ignored. It doesn't mean that there were back of the napkin sales between drug dealers and what appeared to be a nice, sweet little old lady.
Mhm.
There are a lot of things that go on in these mobile home parks that you are inheriting if you're not buying from a more sophisticated person. And by the way, if you buy from a sophisticated person, that doesn't mean that they also weren't just like, hey, just give me the cash, right? Like, I'll let, if you're going to run a landscaping business, like, just don't tell me about it. Just pay my rent and follow my rules, right? So, Ryan, what I kind of want to build upon there is I want to spend a little time around the emotion behind it. And more importantly than that, what kind of resolve and character you had to fight through that. So if you're 18 months into this journey and you close your first one, so you're in a year and a half in, how long until realistically the calm set in, the stress kind of went away, things really hit their stride? And at what point in time were you ready to buy the next one? Because I'm sure moments you were like, what am I doing?
The, those moments were frequent, and my wife reminded me of those moments frequently. Like, what are you doing? What are we doing? Why don't we just sell it and get our money back, and that type of thing. So I think it is just having resolve that you're going to be successful and you can figure it out, and taking one problem on at a time, and doing your best to reach out to people like you, and the mentorship piece, and the connections, especially in our space. Everyone pretty much knows everyone else. It's a tight space, and people are very generous with their knowledge on how to deal with certain situations or tough situations. So that's really what I did. I think one of my strengths is networking with others in the space. creating those relationships. So learning from others was a big help in overcoming those hurdles of rehabs, of finding new tenants, connecting with the city, getting in the good graces of the city, which is a huge deal, so that they're not necessarily like breathing down your neck on little things here and there. So it was a lot of hard work and a lot of networking with people to get through that. So it was roughly a year before I felt like we were fairly stable with a new tenant base and cash flowing enough to pay the bills and have some extra money to pay our own personal bills here and there. And I ended up refining out of that. It was just this last November. So about a little over 2 years, I was able to refi out and I got most of my initial investment out. It appraised, for like 40 or 50,000 more than I bought it. And I still have work to do. There's still units that need rehab and to fill. So it's not finished, but it's much better than when we started. And so when we decided to buy that second one, it was with my current partner, Brett Bowman, and we met through a mutual acquaintance. It happened to be my son's lawn mowing business. So he's 15 years old. So he's a little entrepreneur. So he started his own little lawn mowing business. He was mowing a acquaintance lawn. I had just gotten back from Kansas. I drove there for a week to rehab one of my homes and put a new roof on one of the homes along with my contractor, just to put in the sweat equity and well, that's all I had. It was my time. But he introduced us together. Brett and I met through that experience of when I drove back, the acquaintance, his eyes got big as saucers when he said, yeah, I have a small mobile home park. And it's like, oh, I was just talking to my friend. We wanted to buy a mobile home park. Well, it just so happens there was an off-market community a half mile away from the first one I bought. So we ended up as a trio purchasing that second one, about a 22 space. So another small one. But Brett, he had experience in multifamily, syndication. So he was, I think, with my experience in the space and his ability to raise funds, that was like the next evolution of how we got to where we are now. So that was only another year. So we're at 3 years that we closed on our first large portfolio. So really, it's been about 3 years from first park of 14 to now we're over 600 spaces with 13 communities.
Yeah, and I just want to put emphasis on, this is not for the faint of heart. You were really, it took you a year to have just a little park in a spot where you could breathe a little bit easier and then grow from there.
Yeah.
So I just want to remind everybody listening in that it's really easy to listen to a story like this and be like, man, I would never buy multiple states over. I would never buy little. I would never buy tertiary. I'd never buy park owned homes. And what you may not hear in Ryan's story is that, man, he lived in Washington State. Good luck trying to buy anything in Washington State for a reasonable price. Doesn't happen, right? So he pretty much had to fly to wherever he was going. He looked for over a year. And let me tell you something, Ryan actually he found me before I had a podcast. So I wasn't that easy to find, and Ryan found me. So when he says he feels like he's a pretty good networker, he is a humble man. He's actually really, really, really good at it. Ryan's really, really good at that. So he's doing all of the right things. And despite all of that, before, this is years ago too, by the way, and prices have gone up 50% to 100% in the few short years you and I have known each other. It's a different game out there. If you want to buy a mobile home park nowadays, you are going to spend a lot of money for it. Those air quotes, good deals, they're long since gone. So Ryan, I hear all of that. I love all of that. And I'm doing my best to hopefully let other folks see how impressive of a human you are. You really are, man. Let's take a couple minutes before we talk about the bigger, sexier stuff that you're doing now with the portfolios and your full time. Let's talk a little bit about that gap, that 1 year time frame from 18 months into the business to 2.5 years in the business where you're breathing easy. You had 90% turnover. You were a plane ride away. You were literally flying out on your time off to go and fix roofs yourself.
Mhm.
Ryan, how frequently were you there? How many hours a week were you spending on this? How did you do it from Washington State?
Yeah. Uh, Physically on site, I was there a couple times a year, usually during my like winter break or summer break. That's when I would go. So I have some extended time there. Otherwise, I was on the phone with my the husband and wife duo that are still working with us 3-4 times a week easy, just talking through different aspects or different issues that pop up or things that need to be fixed or whatever it is. I'd say like every day I was doing something, researching, problem solving, trying to figure out where that next park was going to come from. So every day I was, and I would say weekends included, just kind of obsessive with it, maybe to a fault, but I put time in every day on the business. I was writing letters, trying to do, mailers, like handwritten letters to other park owners, trying to do my own cold calling, trying to source my own lists. I didn't have money to even, extra money to hire a VA to do that stuff at the time. So it's just a lot of time and sweat equity into the business. And I think that laid the foundation for the next level of growth that I experienced.
I really admire your dedication. Ryan, you went through just such a bumpy ride to get to where you're at here. So I really hope that everybody listening in can hear that, because you and I have been, again, friends a long time. You were really kind of like an unofficial mentee of mine for many years. And believe it or not, you helped inspire a lot of podcast episodes, for better and for worse, for good reasons and for challenging reasons, which I've told you before. So it's been, I've really enjoyed this friendship over the years, and watching you from afar. And I really hope that folks hear just how tough it was for you. Your dedication is what pushed you through, and your passion is what pushed you through. So the reason why I created this podcast, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, is I really wanted folks to know how really difficult this is. You are buying a business, and it does not always go well. And even when it goes well, stupid things happen. I had a conversation with one of my mentees 2 days ago, and he had just made his first $1 million. And I said, "Congrats, you made your first $1 million. You seem really angry." You clearly have made your first $1 million, because that's typically how it goes. Now all of a sudden you got people reporting to you, and you're responsible to pay people this, that, and the other thing. People are counting on you. Things are moving. You got responsibilities and yada, yada, yada. And uh, the anger, it grows. So if you don't really love it, even when it's successful, it's really tough. But Ryan, let's spend a minute talking about where you went from there. So it took, let's say, 3.5 years from, or say 2.5 years from start to I own one, to I own one that's finally kind of over the hill
Mhm.
and things are kind of calmed down, to now where you have over 600. I know Brett, good dude. Talk to me about how you found this portfolio, and how you're, more specifically, how you're able to use your networking skills to get it funded.
Yeah, so it was a four park portfolio in Iowa, so most of them around the Des Moines area. It was an on market deal. We didn't know the brokers all that well. We do now. We've developed a good relationship, and we had from our letter of intent to actually signing the purchase and sale was a good 4 to 5 months. Just going back and forth over a lot of different aspects of, it's a much more complex type of deal when you're dealing with just 4 parks alone, private utilities. One has a lagoon. Most of them have city. And working with a group that it was owned by 3 people, and they didn't get along, all of them, that well. So trying to manage those pieces of it as well. So luckily, like Brett had some good connections with some investors, and we also, I mean, it's some luck is involved in here too. So 2 of the 3 sellers of that portfolio reinvested with us once they got to meet us, see what our vision was for the properties, which were really ignored for a number of years. And so I think the excitement that we brought and the vision that we brought to those communities kind of reignited their fire for them. And they knew the potential for these communities, that they need infill. They're quality assets, but a lot of infill is needed. And that, I mean, you've had numerous podcasts alone on the pain of even bringing a home into a community. But we have to, we're looking to fill over 100 spaces, which it's just a huge task that you learn a ton along the way. But anyway, so that's how we got a start with a larger portfolio. Just the networking piece, the relationship piece, and just scraping together friends and family on the first one as well. And one of the previous owners that invested back with us, he had a group of friends and family that he brought back into the deal too. So that's how we were able to fund that one.
Let's talk a little bit about now you're full time. That's the big thing. I mean, I remember when I was starting, that was, man, if I could only get full time.
Yeah.
What does that look like now? More so from a cash flow standpoint, what did you have to sacrifice to go full time? And just how does it feel now that you're full time?
It feels good to only have one full-time job right now, because it really felt like 2. And it was 2. So I think the reality of, we've got to make this work and keep this growing now. I no longer have the parachute of another job if it doesn't work out. So that fully invested mindset into it has been the biggest shift, I guess. And just there's no turning back now. We have to be successful, and we will be successful. But I think it's just a mind shift from not having that security of a full-time job to, we're still a startup, right? Essentially we are, and we have a lot invested in it, and we're not quite there yet with where we want to be. So yeah, that has been a difference, so in just having the one focus versus being scattered, I guess, between 2 different jobs. Oh, I should add, essentially you've got to figure out a number that's going to work for you and your family, because I've sacrificed like an amount of money from my full-time job to this one, but it's enough that it works, and it, because the end payoff is going to be huge compared to what I would have been getting in my daytime job. But in the short term, it's a cut, and that's okay. It's enough that we can be comfortable with and continue to grow this thing.
How did it feel taking a pay cut to chase your dreams?
It was, for me, it was an easy decision. It was more convincing my wife that was the right decision, because this is what I have passion for. I think especially like listening to your podcast last month with the almost the plea to help preserve affordable housing and the things that it takes to do that as an owner, like getting rents up to market to make sure that the highest and best use is mobile home community. So developing this passion for providing affordable housing and providing a quality place for people to live is the big driver. Of course, we want to provide for our family and better our family and create generational wealth. Like that's a big piece of our why. But this passion of helping other people, it was there as an educator, and now I get to do it on a bigger scale. So for me personally, that bigger scale, that bigger platform, it was an easy decision, but it was convincing my wife that it was the right decision, even with the pay cut.
I love to hear that. And I went through something similar because if you listen to the second episode of my podcast where I invite my wife to kind of explain how she felt, she probably echoed some very similar sentiments. And look, I love everything you're saying, Ryan, because you have a strong why.
Mm-hmm.
The strong why is what gets you going, because eventually you will exceed what you were making with your W-2 job. Eventually your net worth will multiply and you'll have all the money you've ever wanted ever. And you'll realize in that moment that money it makes life a little bit more comfortable, but that's about it. Money is a tool. Money is not a fixer of deeper, serious issues that are being ignored by a lot of folks, which I feel they are when I field a lot of these calls and emails and stuff from my podcast. A lot of it, you can just tell when you're talking to someone that it's not mobile home parks they're after. It's not what you just said there, which is trying to make a difference in affordable housing in the United States of America that they're after. It's, I hate my job, or I want passive income so I can go and live a life in the Bahamas. And it's just, it's so dang hard to run a business like this, even when it goes well, that if you don't just love it, it is just so hard. So Ryan, I love hearing your why. I will also say this too. I had a conversation with one of my best friends. I've mentioned this before. He was working for a bank and I told him, because he went, oh man, I really want to start my own business. I have an idea. Here's my idea. And I love the idea. And I was like, this is great. And he's like, oh man, but I'm not going to get paid that. I'm going to take a huge pay cut. I'm not going to have a 401k. I'm not going to have benefits and yada, yada, yada. And he's like, I got to do it. And I said, look, you're going to do it. Your passion's there. But guess what? One day you're going to go and sell this company, or at least someone, possibly if you do it right, will come in and offer you millions of dollars to buy out this company. So call it within a decade if things go right. What if I told you took a little bit of pay cut now, if not eventually within a couple of short years, you've matched that salary that you had, if not exceeded it. And then within a decade, someone knocks on your door and hands you millions of dollars. Not saying that's impossible working for the bank, but your boss is probably not going to knock on your office door and walk in and be like, you've done a great job, Ryan. Here's a couple $1,000,000.
Yeah, for sure.
So Ryan, so in other words, the financial pot of gold is definitely at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. But Ryan, what's next? What's not next for Suncrest Capital, and where are you off to next? What's the next chapter of your journey?
Yeah, we've been feeling the pain of scaling, and there's a lot goes into these bigger portfolios. So like we have a portfolio of 6 parks that we're still negotiating. We have a couple of RV parks that will be closing on in about 45 days. Another we just got under contract. So we have our our company goals, and it's like the property under management. So our 10-year goal is $1 billion of commercial real estate under management. Our 3-year goal is 2.5 million under management. So we have some benchmarks that we're trying to get to. So that's the next step, and it's creating a larger pool of investors, creating even more relationships amongst brokers, We have a cold calling team now that we've sourced 2 deals off market for under $8,000 a pad for. So that's really where you can find some value, I guess. But we're doing the steps to get to those ultimate goals. But it's a fun ride, Ryan. It's a fun journey. There are days where there are not fun things for sure, but as long as you have your why in mind and your end goals that you're keep taking steps towards, we're going to make it. We're going to get there. And I think people listening, if they have that same type of drive, they can do it too.
Ryan, with your resolve and your skills and what you've already had to stomach thus far to get to the point you're at now, I know you will. I really have a ton of confidence in you and your team. So that being said, Ryan, how do folks find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so our website, suncrestcap.com. Email is ryan@suncrestcap. I know you've referred people to me that live in our area, neck of the woods. Like that mentorship piece is important to both Brett and I. The educational piece is important to us and giving back. So we've talked to a lot of new people in the space, a lot of people wanting to get in, people that have money that they don't have maybe as much. Like my risk tolerance is pretty high, others aren't. So they've come in and partnered with us for a small GP share so they can learn right alongside of us. To people that don't have any money, but they have enthusiasm and they have a will to learn and they have time that they want to give. And so we found roles for them, and they can get parts of deals that way too. So reach out. We're happy to talk to anybody that's interested in the space, learning. We're still learning from people that have been in it for a long time. So we want to keep giving back.
Ryan, thank you so much again for coming and pouring your heart out, because I know it is not easy to share with the world bumps that you hit along the way. So I really want to make sure you hear me loud and clear when I say thank you. And I really want everybody listening in to know how much courage he had to come out and tell this story. And it's a big reason why I think he networks really, really well, is because he's willing to be really, really humble and honest. So Ryan, thank you. It is awesome to see you succeed. I continue to be one of your biggest fans, man. Thank you. I'm going to drop your email and your website in the show notes too. So anyone listening, not a big deal. All you have to do is go down on your phone or on your desktop, your laptop, and hit go. It'll be there waiting for you. Ryan, again, a million thanks, dude.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good catching up with you. And I thank you. You've been a great mentor for me, and just appreciate everything you do in the space and educating the true aspects of owning these communities. So,
well, thanks for being a big part of it.
All right.
So take care, Ryan.